AIES talk. The Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy is organizing these talks on highly interesting topics on hotspots all over the world. And it is a great pleasure today that I want to welcome you to the theme and the issue of Afghanistan. And what we want to make is just describe the present situation and maybe look a little bit into the future. And it's a great pleasure for me to welcome our today's guest, Ambassador Mansoor Ahmad Khan. If I may introduce this personality with a few words. September this year, Ambassador Mansoor will finish his 60th year of life. He was born in Pakistan, made his master, went to university, made his diplomatic studies, and afterwards joined the diplomatic service of his home country. He had a pretty steep career. He became very soon a director and also the director general. And of course, he had also many posts in foreign countries. He was in Africa, in Harare, Zimbabwe. He was in Europe, in Geneva. He was, of course, in the neighborhood already between 2009 and 2012. He was the deputy head of mission in Kabul, and insofar he certainly is an expert for Afghanistan. Afterwards, he became Deputy High Commissioner also in New Delhi, in India, and then he served as Pakistan's ambassador in Austria and as a permanent representative to the United Nations in Vienna. And since September 2020, he is serving now as the Pakistan ambassador in Kabul, in Afghanistan. It's a great pleasure, Mr. Ambassador, to have this talk together with you. I really want to welcome you and I want to thank you for your readiness to take part. And yeah, if you allow, I will start immediately with the first question. When we look to Afghanistan, just a year ago or 2 years ago, all the papers and the media were full of reports on Afghanistan. This has changed quite a bit. Information from Afghanistan has become very rare all over Europe. And therefore my first question will be, I mean, you have been in Afghanistan now already for more than a year. You have looked at it before from the neighborhood. What is your general impression on this, on the nowadays situation? What are your personal experiences in this very specific situation after the crisis of withdrawal of the Americans and the NATO missions from Afghanistan? So please just go ahead and tell us a little bit from your personal experience.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fasslabend. I first of all would like to personally thank you for this invitation, for this opportunity to address this platform. And I also want to express my gratitude to AIES for arranging this webinar, for arranging this opportunity. And I very fondly recall the time which I spent in Vienna as ambassador and the wonderful life I had in your city and the country. So I really miss that. Well, coming to the topic of discussion, you know, this is an important topic, an important big change occurred in Afghanistan on 15th August 2021 last year, when almost 20 years of presence of US and NATO forces ended, and US and NATO withdrawal took place, and Taliban, who had been fighting an insurgency against US and NATO forces, they came into power. They entered Kabul and took control of Kabul and the country, and the peace process that had been continuing for last few years. It was hoped that this peace process will lead to some kind of transitional arrangement or some kind of arrangement that could lead towards an intra-Afghan political settlement. But while this US and NATO agreement of February 2020 resulted into a peaceful withdrawal of US and NATO forces, but the progress on intra-Afghan front, intra-Afghan political settlement could not take place. As a result of that, in August, Taliban assumed power. In September, they formed their own interim government. Since then, since US and NATO forces have withdrawn, US government, US administration has also frozen their assets. And since Taliban as an entity and Taliban leadership has been under sanctions, so Afghanistan remains under restrictions of international banking. Funds cannot come into Afghanistan because so far this new Afghan regime, Afghan interim government of Taliban, has not been internationally recognized. As a result of these restrictions and pressures of international disengagement, a humanitarian crisis, humanitarian situation has also developed into the country. International community is providing humanitarian assistance. Afghanistan's neighbors are also engaged in that activity, but an economic downfall can also be seen. So while I will be addressing these issues in your subsequent questions, but the one striking thing which I want to mention here is that Afghanistan for past 50 years, since 1970s, has faced some kind of foreign presence. Earlier it was Soviet foreign presence, and a jihad was fought by Mujahideen against Soviet Union. Then after Soviet withdrawal, there was infighting among jihadist groups and there was no peace and stability. Then Taliban came into power from 96 to 2001, and again they were many other groups in Afghanistan were fighting against them. And then from 2001 to 2021, for 20 years, US and NATO forces were present, and there were the governments installed under the US presence or NATO presence were here, but they were also not able to establish a kind of lasting peace or stable regimes in Afghanistan, and many parts of Afghanistan remained out of control of the governments, leading to presence of terrorist groups. This is the first time that in 50 years foreign presence is not there. And now we have also seen that 50 years of conflict or war 50 years of war and instability has not been able to end the conflict. So the hope or optimism is that maybe now an indigenous drive for peace and stability in Afghanistan, an effort for peace and stability and some kind of political framework may lead to a lasting peace and stability in Afghanistan and normalization of this country, this region, as it used to be 1970s or before that. So that is where we are today. We face many challenges, but at the same time, the world is also doing is engaged with the leaders of this country, with the interim government here, in order to explore as to how this situation can lead to a lasting, stable arrangement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for going immediately into the nowadays situation. Maybe just a question, concerning the government, the administration. I mean, when the Taliban took over, I personally was surprised that this happened more or less without any shooting. Not even in Kabul.
Yes.
It was more or less a peaceful takeover. Big surprise for many observers from outside and also for me. And this seemed to me, it gave me the impression of quite some professionality. But of course, the big question is the Taliban's certainly are very well organized, uh, very well organized military organization. The question is, how good will they be also, not only at the military side, but at the political side. And insofar, I wanted to ask you, uh, is the government now in the control of the whole country? And how is the relationship between the government and the different political groups? As we know, the so-called Northern Alliance and other former groups. How is this relationship?
Yes. Dr. Fasslabend, as this change has happened, and after, I think, and the entire world was surprised, the speed at which it took place and the speed at which Taliban took over the government, it was everyone was expecting that the developments will take more time and there will be more time for negotiations and for engagement in the peace process. But Taliban came and unexpectedly the security forces of the previous regime did not put any worthwhile resistance to them, and Taliban took over the control quite easily. Now, if you ask about the situation of Taliban's control and Taliban government's grip on power, I think since 1979 or after 1979, this is the first time that this Taliban government, Taliban interim government, controls entire Afghan territory. It has control on every nook and corner of Afghanistan. This has not been there since for any government since 1979. Even when Taliban were in power in 1990s, they were not controlling Panjshir or some other parts of Afghanistan where there was an active resistance against them. But at this moment, they don't have any active resistance and they fully control the territory and all provinces of Afghanistan, all of Afghanistan's central government institutions, all aspects of life in Afghanistan. But having said that, the fact also remains that Islamic Emirate government or the Afghan interim government as it is called, it is not yet internationally recognized. And because of that, it faces many challenges. And as I have also explained in the previous question, these are political challenges, these are economic challenges, these are humanitarian challenges, there are counter-terrorism challenges also. So in the Afghan interim government or Taliban leadership's dialogue has been continuing with Afghanistan's neighbors, with the region and with the international community at different fora. And the agenda of discussions in these is inclusivity, as to how other groups can be included, other ethnic groups, non-Pashtun groups, non-Taliban groups can become part of the political framework of government in Afghanistan, how the human rights framework can be addressed according to the expectations of Afghanistan's neighbors, region and international community, particularly the women's rights, and how since the counter-terrorism, Afghanistan can become a part of international counter-terrorism framework because the country faces the challenge of resurgence of Daesh and many other regional terrorist groups. So on all these areas, an active dialogue is continuing on inclusivity. There is a wide gap among the perceptions of the Afghan interim government or Taliban and other groups, other political groups on the other hand. And those groups who are not in power, those political groups, ethnic groups, or leaders who are not in power, they are of two types. One, those who are in opposition but inside Afghanistan, and there are a number of leaders and groups who have already left Afghanistan and are living in many other countries, whether it is Tajikistan or Iran or Turkey or some other parts of even in Europe. So a dialogue is the need, dialogue between Afghan interim government, Afghan Taliban, and these political forces is need of the hour, and similarly dialogue between Afghan interim government and international community, human rights, particularly women, girls' access to education, women's access to working places. There are, as compared to past practices under Afghan Taliban, at this moment, more freedoms and more space is available, but there is also a room for improvement, and similarly in the field of counterterrorism. So these are the areas where a dialogue inside Afghanistan and with of Afghan interim government and international forces is also continuing, and this is going to be a process, and as a result of this process, Afghan interim government, Afghan Taliban leadership's engagement is going to expand with the rest of the world. And if whenever things move towards a recognition, stage of recognition, it will be as a result of that process.
Yeah. May I add a short question in this context? When the Taliban started out in Kabul, there also was the promise that they would take representatives of the different ethnic groups into their administration. Did this happen? Do the other groups have ministers or state secretaries, or can they take part at the government?
What Dr. Fasslabend, what you are saying is part of the inclusivity and how to establish or how to achieve an inclusive political framework in Afghanistan. Currently, after Taliban came into power in Afghanistan after August 2021, they constituted a government which comprises Taliban leaders, Taliban figures. Taliban have been in their dialogue with their neighbors and with the international community. They have been saying, they have been claiming non-ethnic groups or non-ethnic political leaders as part of this framework. For example, their deputy prime minister is an Uzbek, their chief of army staff is a Tajik, and there are some other also Tajik, Hazara, and Uzbek figures as part of the administration, their administration. But at the same time, there has been an objection or a criticism from the other side that these all figures belong to Taliban's own organization, and there are no non-Taliban figures in the political framework or in the Afghan interim government. So the dialogue which the Taliban's interim government continues to have with the international community is actually focusing on this dimension, this political dimension. There remain different perceptions about it. Afghan interim government's own interpretation of inclusivity has a gap with the international interpretation, and that is an area where I think a continued dialogue, continued engagement with Afghan inter government will be beneficial.
Yeah. You mentioned already the economic situation, and of course, everybody could expect that this would become one of the big issues, not only due to the fact that so much money was transferred from America and from Europe to the people in Afghanistan in the last 2 decades. And of course, this has changed. Now, how is the economic situation in daily life in the countryside? Is there enough food? Are there enough vital goods, or how is this situation?
Uh, Dr. Fasslabend, the economic situation is quite serious, and because of the economic situation, humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan is also quite serious. For this, we have to understand the situation as to how things have happened. For past 20 years, Afghanistan's economy, Afghanistan's life has been dependent on foreign aid. 75 to 80% of Afghanistan's economy has been based on foreign resources or foreign aid. Uh, because this has been an aid-based economy, and this entire aid or support that was available to Afghanistan through international resources also vanished when US and NATO withdrew from Afghanistan. And because Afghanistan's assets, Afghanistan's own foreign exchange reserves were also frozen as a result of Taliban takeover of Afghanistan. And because of Taliban being a sanctioned entity by the UN and by international system, so banks have not been able to work in Afghanistan like they work in all other internationally recognized states. Because of that, we see a serious downfall in the economy, a serious decline in the economy, a serious decline in the economic activity in the country. As a result, a humanitarian situation has worsened. Food shortages can be seen there. International community, including the neighboring countries, United Nations, and other humanitarian organizations have been trying to provide food, medicines. But as a result of this decline in the economic activity, we see a severe or sharp decline in livelihoods. So livelihoods are not available to the people, and because livelihoods are not available to the people, so it is difficult for them to make both ends of their lives meet. And as a result of that, people from Afghanistan, Afghans from belonging to various walks of life, various professions, are also trying to leave the country, and hundreds of thousands of people have actually left Afghanistan since last June, July, or August because of their anticipation that they will be facing economic hardships and economic suffering. So this is, I think, if you ask my own opinion, economic challenge and humanitarian challenge which is related to it is a big challenge for Afghanistan, and not only for Afghanistan, but for its neighbors, because when Afghans try to leave the country, most of them go to neighbors like Pakistan and Iran, and from there a large number also makes efforts to go to Europe and find settlement there, or to United States, Canada, and other parts of the world. So I think this is this economic question, humanitarian question, and related dimensions of migration with it are a serious challenge for Afghanistan at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. And what about safety and security? I mean, of course, this certainly must have changed. There was quite some police force in the former period, and there was a military build-up. Of course, those organizations do not exist anymore. So far, how does it work? How do people feel safe when they're on the streets? Do they feel safe during night times? What is your impression?
You know, Afghan Taliban, they specialize in the field of security. So security is one of their strong areas. They have taken control of Afghanistan, Afghanistan's cities, Afghanistan's villages, Afghanistan's towns, and they have imposed strict law and order in Afghanistan. So generally speaking, people in the street, people in the market feel safe, and there is you can see normal life running in Afghanistan, and people are not threatened by any security threats on the street. But at the same time, when you are when as living in a society as human beings, there are different groups in the society. There is media, there is civil society, there are women, there are other groups. So these specific groups may have their own concerns with regard to some of the restrictions which are imposed in a conservative society under Taliban. But generally, I mean, if you generally the safety and security features are there. You are right. The previous administration used to have around 350,000 security forces combined. I mean, police and army. There was about 350,000 security forces. Since those security forces, when Taliban came, they became disbanded, and Taliban are in the process of raising and creating their own security forces. So these 350,000 security forces present another kind of challenge. And that challenge is that since they are now not employed, so they are facing hardships of their own. Some of them may be trying to leave the country and would leave the country, and while some other may find some temptation to join some other resistance groups or Daesh or other terrorist groups. So these kind of challenges are there, will be there, and these challenges. That is why it is important that Afghanistan, international community has to remain engaged with Afghanistan's interim government, with the Taliban leadership, with a view to find a more sustainable solution of political, economic, and humanitarian framework in Afghanistan.
Uh-huh. Yeah, thank you. And when we come to the question of social life, of course, Afghanistan is a country of very old and strong traditions. The question is, has this changed very much? How is your impression and your experience on the daily life? Is market life still existing as it used to be in a city like Kabul? Or how do you feel about these changes in social life? I mean, you had the experience as deputy head of the mission already 10 years
Yes.
ago. And if you compare this situation, how would you feel about it? And especially also, I mean, if we go maybe also specifically to ethnic and religious minority, the more or less out of the center, or what is their life?
I think two kinds of impact are noticeable. Since Taliban have come into power, so social life has changed because of the Taliban's own ideology or Taliban's own living style. So according to that, some changes in the social life can be seen. As far as the life in the city, life in the street, life in the markets is concerned, this time one thing is noticeable or one thing is visible, that Taliban have allowed the normal life to continue. So normal life in the cities and towns is continuing, and but there is a reduction in the activity in different areas because of economic decline, because livelihoods are disappearing, because there is a reduction in economic activity. Number of shops may be increased, number of people selling different kind of items has decreased, number of buyers decreased. So overall economic activity has affected the social life. Now when we try to address the ethnic and religious minorities issue which you have mentioned, that is very peculiar of Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a multi-ethnic country. In Afghanistan, majority is Pashtun, but then there are significantly big minorities in Tajiks, Uzbeks, Hazaras, and Turkmen, and some other groups. So the basic reservation or basic criticism that comes against Taliban government is that it is a Pashtun dominated government, and therefore when we talk about inclusivity, when the world talks about inclusivity, their expectation, their demand is that some share should be there for ethnic minorities in Afghanistan, Tajiks, Hazaras, Uzbeks, and others. And there, as I explained, the Taliban have an interpretation that they have given some share to the ethnic minorities, like some Tajiks and some Uzbeks and some Hazaras are in their cabinet. But I think world's demand is that this share has to increase and this share has to go beyond Taliban ideology. When we talk about religious minorities, that is also an important area, because in Afghanistan, I think between 10 to 15% population is Shia population. And since Taliban are a Sunni force, these Shia minorities have always been concerned. Whenever there has been a Taliban rule, they have continued to demand that they should also have a share in governance and in political and economic activities in Afghanistan. So there, I think the good thing I can notice is that despite all these reservations and tensions about Taliban rule and Taliban regime, I continue to see some dialogue that is taking place in Afghanistan between Afghan Taliban leaders and between the Shia minority leaders here. So I believe that if this dialogue continues, then I think these different religious forces can also find some ways of finding a share or finding a way of coexisting in a political framework in future, and that is the only sustainable way to move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the big questions already before the Taliban overtook power in Afghanistan certainly was the question how the status of female persons, of women, would be in the future. You know, the Taliban's then promised more or less free access to education for universities. Of course, everybody knows that between a program and real life,
yes,
there's quite some differences possible. So how is the real situation? What is the real picture about it?
When Taliban came into power and they established their interim government, the world's expectation and the world's demand was that there should be opportunities for women to receive education, there should be opportunities for women to work in their own professions, and they should continue to have opportunities in different spheres of life. After some time, in last few months, this criticism also came from various quarters that Afghan Taliban or Taliban interim administration is not providing necessary facilities to women students to continue, for girl students to continue their education in high schools or in universities. It was also related to a practical problem because of the financial issues. Afghan interim government, which wanted to provide special facilities, segregated facilities, separate facilities for education of girl students, or particularly in the higher school sections and the universities, because of their own ideology, they were not able to start all the schools and universities because they were not in a position to pay the salaries. In that respect, there has been some positive progress in recent weeks and months, and now international community has also come forward. UNICEF has also provided assistance and have made pledges. Some other countries are also providing assistance. Other UN institutions are also coming forward to provide that important assistance to Afghanistan, and Afghan Taliban government have announced opening all girl students, girl high schools and all universities for girls. I mean, for all girl students to go to the universities in Afghanistan from this month. So earlier this month, the Afghanistan's warmer areas, climatically Afghanistan's warmer cities they have opened their schools and universities, and girls are going there to do those institutions, which is a very promising thing. In the colder areas of Afghanistan, the universities are going to open in a few days now, in the middle of March, middle or third week of March. And I was actually, coincidentally, I was pleased to see a tweet today in Afghan social media that Kabul University has announced that it will be starting its operations for both boys and girls very soon. So I think there are credible reports that now the universities and high schools will be open, and girls will be joining these high schools and universities all over Afghanistan. But I think international community and Afghanistan's neighbors, region, should provide more assistance to Afghanistan in terms of addressing this particular requirement, and providing them additional resources so that there are opportunities for girl students for their education. Similarly, I see also that women are working in different offices in Afghanistan. That is my own observation. And I think if international community continues to remain engaged with Afghan Taliban, there can be ways of securing a framework where women can find more opportunities, not only in different offices and professions, but also in politics and Afghanistan's institutions. So I think engagement is the only way to achieve these things.
Okay, yeah, certainly an important question also for a big part of the population. And I know how difficult it sometimes can be, to master such questions in a very short time. Maybe let's go now to international relations, I mean, as we see it, of course, and as we expected it, your own home country, Pakistan, would overtake more or less a leading role in contacting the administration and the government in Kabul, and maybe also some others. Everybody expected it, and the Taliban, as far as I know, also had their first visit to Beijing. So far, there was the contacts with China. Russia did more than before, to intensify the contacts. So how is the picture beside that, what is more or less open for everybody? I mean, who is engaging, which countries are engaging themselves quite a bit in Afghanistan, and who is still in distance to the situation?
Yeah, Dr. Fasslabend, when this 15 August political developments took place last year, immediate focus of the countries who remained engaged with Afghanistan went on evacuations, humanitarian operations and evacuations, and a big process of evacuation, or a big evacuation operation took place from Kabul airport. So the focus during that phase was on evacuation. Now, subsequently, in subsequent months, when we look at the picture of the engagement of different neighboring and regional countries with Afghanistan, I can categorize them into two groups. One is the immediate neighbors. Afghanistan has 6 immediate neighbors. Out of those 6 immediate neighbors, the countries who have maintained their relations with Afghanistan, their interaction with Afghanistan, and their diplomatic presence in Kabul, these are 5 countries, which are Pakistan, Iran, China, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. The 6th neighbor, Tajikistan, because of its own sensitivities, it has serious issues with the change that took place on 15th August, and therefore it has not revived its diplomatic presence in Kabul so far, and some engagement between Afghan interim government and Tajikistan will of course be required to melt that ice. Among the second category is the region. Among the regional countries, you can find some countries playing very active role in terms of their very constructive efforts to help stabilize the situation. These include Turkey, which has a lot of cultural and social connectivity with Afghanistan. Then there is Qatar. Then there is Russia. Recently, UAE and Saudi Arabia have also opened their diplomatic missions, although not at a full-fledged ambassador's level, but at a particular level. And then Kazakhstan, throughout these past few months, since 15th August, has maintained their diplomatic mission as well as an active engagement with Afghan interim government. And then when we come to institutions, international institutions like United Nations and EU, they have also maintained some engagement. United Nations has remained present in Afghanistan, and I must say they are playing an active role in humanitarian and economic assistance to Afghanistan. EU has, in recent weeks, opened a low-level diplomatic presence mission in Afghanistan, reopened their mission with the focus on providing humanitarian assistance. And OIC also has appointed their new ambassador and a special representative on humanitarian assistance, but he also has yet to join the mission here. So this kind of engagement is there, presence is there, and then Afghan interim government continues to run all those diplomatic missions in other countries of the region. In some of the countries, there are diplomats who have been, or staff who have been appointed by this regime, but there are many countries where the staff and diplomats appointed by the previous regimes are still there. So this kind of current situation is prevailing with regard to Afghanistan's engagement with other countries.
Yeah, you talked about the neighborhood. I mean, in the past, there always used to be a special relationship on the one hand from the eastern side, from Pakistan, and from the western side, from Iran. And how does this work in cooperation or in competition? What is the actual situation?
I think it's a very interesting question because all of us recall what happened in 1990s. And in 1990s, when there was infighting in Afghanistan, there were also the regional countries were competing for different kinds of interests in Afghanistan that exacerbated or that aggravated the deep instability in Afghanistan. This time, the encouraging thing is that all Afghanistan's neighbors and Afghanistan's region is focusing on constructive efforts for peace and stability in Afghanistan. And neighbors of Afghanistan particularly believe that a stable Afghanistan will provide opportunities for using Afghanistan as a transit hub, as a hub of regional connectivity between Central Asia and South Asia, between East and West, connectivity from South Asia to Eurasia. Therefore, all these countries, whether it is Pakistan and Iran or Pakistan, China, Turkmenistan, all of these countries are actually engaged in efforts that Afghanistan should, the peace and stability should be achieved on a permanent basis in Afghanistan. It should lead to economic connectivity with the neighboring countries, which should expand into wider regional connectivity, because that will lead to a prosperity which will be mutually beneficial for all these countries. And I tell you from here that I have been engaged with my counterparts here or diplomats from all the neighboring countries, regional countries. They are really looking forward to Afghanistan going towards stability. If Afghanistan doesn't go on that course of economic stability, regional connectivity, the other option will be disastrous for everyone.
Yeah. And other big countries like, I don't know, Japan, that is investing in so many countries all over the world, and other also Asian countries. How does this work? And especially maybe one question. I remember that the Taliban asked the Turkish government to overtake the airport in Kabul. Did this happen? How is the interconnectivity between Kabul and other cities in the world?
Japan is also engaging with Afghanistan interim government. They don't have a full-fledged embassy here, but they have opened their embassy, although not at the ambassador level, and their diplomats visit Kabul and spend some time here and engage on humanitarian and development-related issues on a temporary basis. But we are encouraged that Japan is also emitting signals that it wants to engage economically and it wants to engage for helping Afghanistan in the humanitarian field. As regards to the airport, Kabul airport throughout this period has remained operational since 15th August. First, all the evacuation, US led evacuation took place from the Kabul airport. After that, after the evacuation was completed, Kabul airport was not in a good shape, but then necessary repairs were conducted and gradually the facilities at Kabul airport have been increasing. Turkey and Qatar together are engaged in negotiations with Afghan interim government for acquiring the airport's operations and starting so that the normal flight operations with the international destinations could start from Kabul. I think this process will take some more time. There has been, my counterparts from Turkey or Qatar have been telling me that there have been some progress in these negotiations, but this may take some more time. But we are hoping that this will lead to restoration of full-fledged operations at Kabul airport. At the moment, regular flights are departing from Afghanistan's own airlines are running flights between Kabul and Islamabad almost on daily basis, between Kabul and Tehran, between Kabul and Dubai and Abu Dhabi, between Kabul and Doha, and between Kabul and Istanbul. So reasonable level of connectivity is there, but of course, restoration of international flight operations may take some time.
Yeah, and I mean, on the terrestrial side, connectivity, for example, between Afghanistan and Pakistan, this works out very normally, or how is the situation?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, at the terrestrial side, on the roads to the neighboring countries. I mean, the situation,
yes.
The border between Pakistan and Afghanistan is rather normal. And how is it with, I don't know, Iran or Uzbekistan?
Yes.
Or Turkmenistan?
Yes. No, border between Pakistan and Afghanistan has been quite normal. Trade, transit and movement of people has been continuing through different crossing points. Pakistan and Afghanistan have 2,600 kilometer long border, and it's a mountainous border, and there are areas of difficulty also, and a large number of people move across this border from designated crossing points. Pakistan government is working with the Afghan government since large quantum of movement of people and trade and transit takes place through these border crossing points. So one by one, we are going into mutual arrangements for enhancing facilities of border crossing points. For example, on 28th, Afghan Minister of Commerce and Pakistan Minister of Commerce will be visiting Torkham, which is the famous crossing point, Torkham border crossing point, for announcing some key measures for facilitation of movement of trade and people between the two countries. Similarly, we intend to bring this kind of movement in and from other border crossing points. There are 5-6 major border crossing points between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Similarly, Afghanistan's transit and trade with Iran is, I understand, taking place very smoothly. And also, Afghanistan continues to have trade. Despite its difficulties, it continues to have trade with Tajikistan. And then it also is improving its transit arrangements and trade arrangements and electricity supply arrangements with Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. So the focus, the future focus is on increasing connectivity and, of course, dialogue on political issues like inclusivity and women, human rights, and then counterterrorism, combined with economic engagement, can bring lasting peace and stability.
Okay. Yeah, this brings me to more or less my last question complex. The question, I mean, what can Europe do? How can we help people? What can the global community do in order not to forget Afghanistan and just leave it where it is? What can we do in order to stabilize the situation, not only in the interest of the region, but of the whole world?
Yeah, I think Dr. Fasslabend, Europe, EU countries have played an important role in terms of supporting development in Afghanistan in past 20 years. And they have really helped Afghanistan in a big way. Unfortunately, the changes that took place in 2021, after that, European countries have withdrawn from Afghanistan physically and they are not present as they were present before, but they still remain actively engaged in addressing humanitarian and economic dimensions, humanitarian and economic assistance to Afghanistan, and that should be appreciated. We believe, my view is that this engagement between European Union, European countries, and Afghanistan should increase. Because if European Union and the international community like United States and other major powers, if they will remain engaged with Afghanistan even after this change, if they will remain engaged with Afghan interim government, Afghan Taliban leadership, this engagement can lead to political frameworks, evolution of political frameworks in Afghanistan, and ultimately Afghanistan's recognition at some stage, or Afghanistan's political entity or government's recognition at some stage. If the progress does not take place in that direction, the other option will be, as I said earlier also, it will be disastrous. If Afghan Taliban interaction and engagement between Afghan Taliban government and the international community doesn't take place in the desired direction and doesn't lead to constructive outcomes, and Afghanistan goes towards isolation, then instability in Afghanistan is likely to increase. More terrorist groups like Daesh and regional terrorist groups will find more space in Afghanistan, and this will not be good for either Afghanistan itself or for Afghanistan's neighbors. For regional peace and security, it will have disastrous implications for the international peace and stability and even the distant countries like Europe or United States. If Afghanistan is stable, it will lead to development in Afghanistan, stability in Afghanistan, and Afghanistan staying as a sustainable, stable state in its neighborhood, in its region. If Afghanistan doesn't achieve that kind of stability, permanent stability, and doesn't come out of the war of past 50 years, then this instability will lead to continued migration from Afghanistan, continued exodus of people from Afghanistan. That will destabilize or that will be destabilizing for Afghanistan's neighbors like Pakistan. We already have 4 million Afghans, and if more Afghans continue uh, to leave Afghanistan due to economic and other hardships, it will cause more difficulties for Pakistan, other neighbors, Iran, and also a large number of these people, these Afghans leaving Afghanistan, have been moving to Europe. So Europe, which is already facing its own immigration or migration challenges, these challenges will become aggravated, these challenges will multiply. So I think it is important that engagement with the Afghan interim government at the political level, at the humanitarian level, at the economic level should continue through a very structured dialogue for bringing peace and stability to Afghanistan. And of course, this will result into peace and stability of the entire region.
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning we have spoken about rare, seldom reports on Afghanistan in our media. When they are reporting now, they rather talk about hunger, fame, and very serious situations. Do those international programs of food supply for the people, do they really work, and are they helping to overcome the difficult situation, especially during wintertime?
Yes, before winter, there was a fear that winter will bring big catastrophe or disaster to Afghanistan. Now, when we are moving towards the end of the winter, my own opinion is that while there was a crisis, there was a serious situation, but Afghan institutions themselves, Afghan people themselves, and Afghanistan's neighbors and international community has tried to help them. Pakistan, for example, has provided 50,000 metric tons of wheat to Afghanistan, which comes in different batches and is stored by Afghan government in their different storage points, and from where they supply to different parts of the country. Other countries are also providing wheat assistance. WFP, World Food Program, in a big way is helping Afghanistan. United Nations institutions, UNDP and UNOCHA, WHO are also providing useful economic and humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan. So I think I must appreciate that international community has, despite all these political challenges for Afghanistan, despite the fact that such a change occurred in Afghanistan at a sudden pace last year, they have responded in a very dignified manner. And I would urge the international community to continue this assistance on a humanitarian basis, because people of Afghanistan need it.
Okay. So thank you very much. And before I say a last word, in order to thank you, I just would like to announce our next AIES talk. As everybody can imagine, we will talk about Russia and Ukraine and what is going on here. And my partner will be, on the one hand, Ambassador Saidik, who has quite some experience. He was a special envoy of OECD in Ukraine for quite some years. He has served in the Russian embassy, in the Austrian embassy in Moscow, and so far he really knows both countries and the situation. And in addition, also Velina Chakharova, the director of our institute, will join us, and maybe some other people. Okay, so if you are interested, next week, this will be March the 2nd, Wednesday. Yeah, Wednesday, the 2nd of March at 3:00 p.m. And we will do it in English language. Okay, so I want to finish now our today's talk, and I really want to thank you, Mr. Ambassador Mansoor, not only for your readiness, but for your open and frank way to answer the questions, and also to give us this picture of real life, not just any picture, but just a picture as you see it. And knowing you, as an outstanding diplomat with such an experience, it certainly was a privilege we had to have you in order to give us impressions on Afghanistan, and not only impressions, but also solid informations. I really want to thank you. I wish you and your family all the best. I guess you have three children, as far as I know. Yeah. I
Yes.
hope the family will enjoy your life, and also your job as Pakistan ambassador will allow you to enjoy the situation and also private life a little bit. If this is okay with you, after a certain period, we will try to ask you once again in order to give us some information on the further development in the coming month. So far, Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for taking part at this AIES talk. Thank you so much for your information.
Thank you, Dr. Fasslabend. I would also like to take this opportunity to really thank you for inviting me for this discussion, for these, absorbing interaction. I hope the audience would have found it interesting. I have tried to give you a very realistic picture of what has happened, what is happening, and what may happen. So I think it has been a pleasure coming to this forum and joining you. And I would like to thank you for your very kind wishes for me, for my family, my kids. Two of my three kids are studying in Vienna, and whenever I visit next time to see them, I will definitely come and see you. But thank you very much for taking me for this discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, and all the best.
Thank you.
So I
Bye.
want to say goodbye to our audience and wish you all the best, and maybe see you next week on Wednesday, the 2nd of March at 3 p.m. on the issue of Russia and Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.